Who invented the guillotine? One of the great ironies in history is that Dr. Joseph Ignace Guillotine was an opponent of capital punishment. But despite the fact that he was the guillotine's namesake, he did not invent the device. How the guillotine came to be. The infamous death machine's true creators were Antoine I. Louis, the French doctor who drew up the initial design around 1792, and Tobias Schmidt, the German piano maker who executed it. Pun intended. Joseph Ignace Guillotine's contribution came a bit earlier. As a delegate to France's National Assembly of 1789, he proposed the novel idea that if executions could not be banned entirely, the condemned should at least be entitled to a swift and relatively merciful death. What's more, he argued that all criminals, regardless of whether they were rich or poor, should be executed by the same method. This last point may seem obvious, but prior to the French Revolution, wealthy miscreants who were up to be offed could slip executioners a few coins to guarantee speedy dispatches. Poorer ones often went coach class. They got to be the coach while horses tied to their arms and legs pulled them in 4 different directions. What a way to go! In April 1792, the Assembly used its new guillotine for the first time on a platform in Paris Place de Grève. 2 vertical wooden beams served as runners for the slanted steel blade and stood about 15 feet high. At the bottom, 2 boards with a round hole, called the lunette, locked the victim's head in place. The blade was hoisted to the top with pulleys and released with a lever. After a few grisly mishaps, executioners learned to grease the grooves on the beams with tallow in order to ensure that no one was left with half a head, which in this case was definitely not better than having none at all. The Reign of Terror. The first head to roll was that of Nicolas Jacques Pelletier, a common thief. During the Reign of Terror, from January 1793 to July 1794, more than 10,000 people had an exit interview with Madame Guillotine, including King Louis XVI and his wife, Marie Antoinette. The daily parade of victims drew crowds of gawkers. Journalists printed programs, vendors sold refreshments, and nearby merchants rented out seats with unobstructed views. This bloody period ended with the execution of Robespierre, one of the revolution's leaders and an early advocate of the guillotine. France continued to use the guillotine in cases of capital punishment throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. The last official guillotine execution took place on September 10, 1977. Because they were embarrassed by their association with this instrument of terror, the descendants of Joseph Guillotine petitioned the government to change the name of the machine. The government declined to comply, so the family changed its name instead and passed into obscurity. Not so for the guillotine itself, though it is now relegated to museums. It remains a grim symbol of power, punishment, and sudden death.